Hello, students. Today we are going to be talking about the scientific method, and that is how scientists go about collecting information and answering questions. So, science is an organized way of gathering and analyzing evidence about the natural world. So, what that means is that science is always going to be answering questions that we have about the world. When a scientist is doing an experiment, one of the things that they do is take observations. So that's a process of noticing and describing things that they see in a careful and orderly way, which means that, for example, if they want to know how quickly a plant grows, rather than just guessing, they would measure how tall the plant grows every single day, and then they might discover that it grows the same amount every single day, or that at the end of their experiment it won't get any taller. But they will take the same type of measurement and they'll do it perhaps daily or every other day so that it's an orderly process. When a scientist is doing an experiment, one of the things that they will often do before they start collecting data is develop a hypothesis. A hypothesis is a possible explanation or a possible answer to a scientific question. Sometimes it's also referred to as an educated guess. So when a scientist asks a question like, how tall will my plant grow in 1 week, they can make an estimation about how tall they think the plant is going to get before they start collecting data. That estimation is the hypothesis. Once data collection has begun, data collection can help to prove the hypothesis, or it can also disprove a hypothesis. Another name for data is evidence. Data is always just information, and that's gathered through observation. So anything that can be observed, you can collect data on. Data is always information gathered from things you can see. So in our example of wondering how tall plants will grow, you can see that over time the height of the plant can change. And a scientist can actually put that information later in a graph, and that will show the number of days and the height of the plant and how the plant changed in height as they took experimental data. So in science, there's a lot of different things that can be added to the scientific method, but basically the way that science works is that first the scientist will identify a problem because they have a question that they would like to have answered about something in science, whether it's nature or outer space or whatever. Once they've identified a problem, they usually form a hypothesis because they have an idea of what's going to happen, but they don't know for sure. Then they can collect data and make observations about what it is that they are trying to learn. Once they're done collecting data, they need to analyze it. So that means taking the numbers from the information you collected and figuring out what they mean. And when you analyze data, that allows you to come to a conclusion. So you might, as a scientist, learn that a specific species of plant grows 1 inch per week because you collected data on how much it grew over the course of 1 week. So the experimental design that a scientist comes up with is very much like the scientific method. They identify a problem or a question, they make a hypothesis, then they have to design a procedure. So that's how are you going to test your hypothesis. So if, for example, the scientists wanted to measure how tall the plant is going to grow during a week, then they're going to need to decide how frequently they should make measurements. They should decide what unit they're going to take measurements in. You know, if you're growing a very small plant, you might do your measurement in centimeters, but if you're measuring a tree, maybe you measure in meters, or a larger unit. Then they are going to spend time actually gathering their data and analyzing their data, and then they can draw some conclusions. So in your notes right now, what you should do is come up with your own experiment and you should write down a question, a hypothesis, and you should try to figure out how you would collect your data, and that is called a procedure. This just gives you some idea of how scientists do their work. So what kind of question would you want to answer if you were a scientist? What do you think that the answer is, and how do you test it? And that's the procedure. So go ahead and do that in your notes, and then you can move on to the next slide. If you get stumped, you can go to next slide 8, and that gives you an example of identifying a problem, making a hypothesis, and creating a procedure, and you can use that as a template to figure out how you would create a scientific question and then answer it. On this slide is an example of how someone does the scientific method or creates an experiment. And so the example is the question says, does a plant grow taller in the dark or in the light? And then my hypothesis is that the plant that is growing in the light will grow taller. But to test that, because I don't yet know the answer, I need to create a procedure. So my procedure that I've come up with is to plant 10 seeds in a pot, and that one will go in the dark. And then I'm going to get another plant, or another pot, and plant 10 seeds in that one, but put this one in the light. Then I'm going to measure my height of my plants every day for 2 weeks. And that's my procedure. Those are the steps I'm going to take to collect data. And then once I have that data, I can eventually analyze it. When a scientist has completed an experiment, they can publish their results. They do that in something called a scientific journal, and those are places where scientists publish the results of their studies. Those journals are usually peer-reviewed, meaning that another scientist or several scientists look at their experiment and check their data and check their methods to make sure that their experiment makes sense and that their data makes sense. When they publish their results, then other scientists can use their results to help them guide their own research. If you have many different experiments that have published results and many of the results are similar, then you get a theory. A theory in science is many hypotheses that are similar that have been proven many times, and they are the best explanation for some phenomena in nature. So in science, a theory is extremely well proven because it has been proven many different times through many different experiments. That's different from a hypothesis. A hypothesis might be a new idea that's being tested, and a theory is a well-established idea that has been proven many times.